Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most unwanted job descriptions in medieval Europe, the executioner. And that's saying something in a time when rat catcher and full-time plague survivor were legitimate career paths. From swinging the sword of justice to being cursed, feared, and socially exiled, the life of a medieval executioner was a strange, brutal paradox. He was necessary, but never welcome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you've just been born. Congratulations. You're the newest addition to a proud medieval family of executioners. That's right. While other babies are wrapped in linen and destined to become bakers, butchers, or if they're lucky, monks, you are gently placed in a cradle next to a whetstone and an axe. It's not a rattle you're shaking, it's a future. In the Middle Ages, execution wasn't a job you applied for. There was no town hall resume submission. It was inherited, like a really cursed family heirloom. If your father was the executioner, you were the next in line. Simple. No room for career changes, no hopes of becoming a travelling bard or a slightly sad shoemaker. Your path was laid out, and it ended at the chopping block. From the moment you're old enough to walk, you're already getting side-eyed by villagers. Other kids run from you at the well. Adults lower their voices when you walk by, as if your tiny toddler hands are already soaked in symbolic blood. Spoiler, they are. Symbolically, of course, for now. You grow up in a house where the family dinner table conversations are less, "How was your day?" and more, "How many strikes should it take to get it clean?" There's no escaping it. Your toys might include miniature gallows, and your bedtime stories involve phrases like drawing and quartering instead of happily ever after. And it's not just the job, it's the reputation. You could be the kindest, most literate, soft-spoken child in the kingdom, and people would still treat you like you sneak into homes at night whispering threats to chickens. Your very surname might mark you. In some towns, entire family lines of executioners were labelled, tracked, and sometimes forbidden from entering churches, bakeries, or public baths. Hygiene and salvation? Not for you. But hey, there are perks. You'll probably never get bullied too hard. No one wants to mess with the executioner's kid. The fear is real. You might not be liked, but you will be respected, in the same way people respect thunder or very sharp knives. So welcome to life. You didn't ask for this, but it's yours now, forever. So, you've just been born. Hooray, a bouncing baby bundle of joy, swaddled in wool, baptized in holy water, and immediately cursed with generational trauma. You're the newest member of a family of executioners, medieval society's most necessary yet least invited profession. While other children are destined to churn butter or one day inherit a sheep farm, you've been born into the one job that guarantees everyone will avoid you like a coughing stranger during a plague year. Your future is set. Sharp metal, public crowds, and a lifetime of being the guy no one makes eye contact with, even when you're 6. And no, you don't get to choose. Executioner isn't something you apply to be. There's no medieval job fair with a booth that says, "Love justice, hate popularity, inquire within." If your dad swung the axe, guess what you're swinging after puberty? Even as a toddler, villagers whisper when you pass. You haven't even committed your first decapitation and you're already treated like you bite livestock. The blacksmith's kid gets candy. You get suspicious glances and extra space in the pews. That is, if you're even allowed in church. And family dinners? Less, "How was your day?" and more, "Did you remember to oil the gallows chain?" Your bedtime stories don't feature dragons, unless they're being hanged for heresy. Your toys include miniature scaffolds. Your version of hide and seek usually ends in people hiding and never coming back. You can't even marry out of it. Most respectable families won't let their daughters within 5 feet of you, let alone the altar. Which is probably fine. since your family name has been whispered like a curse word for the past 3 generations. That's Carl's boy, you know, the one who swung too deep last winter. And sure, there are perks. No one bullies the executioner's kid. Even the local bully doesn't want to end up as practice. You develop a strong back, a steady hand, and a deadpan stare that gets you out of most social events, which is helpful because you're never invited anyway. So there it is. You're not just born, you're branded. You didn't choose the axe life. The axe life chose you, and it's not letting go. By the time you're old enough to grow a beard or swing a training axe, you've already accepted one core truth. The town needs you, but they'd prefer you stay out of sight, preferably behind a curtain, a hill, or a moral veil of plausible deniability. As a medieval executioner, you're society's walking contradiction. You do the work no one else dares to do. And for that, you're rewarded with silence, suspicion, and the occasional terrified blessing from 10 feet away. People talk to you like you're a haunted well, useful in a crisis, but deeply unsettling the rest of the time. Need someone publicly disemboweled? The town calls you. Need someone invited to their daughter's wedding feast? Not a chance. You're the final solution to every problem the sheriff doesn't want on his conscience. And yet, once the deed is done, and the head rolls into the hay, everyone suddenly remembers they had somewhere else to be. Usually, anywhere that isn't next to you. In court records, you're referred to as the Blade of Justice. In tavern gossip, you're that creepy guy who probably talks to skulls. You could save a child from drowning and someone would still whisper, "Yes, but how many people has he chopped in half?" To them, you are both punishment and paranoia, a reminder that the law has teeth, big, sharp, public ones. And let's not pretend it's just the peasants. Even nobles turn their noses up. They'll pay you in silver and pat themselves on the back for upholding justice. But you'll never be invited to dine in their halls, unless it's to demonstrate proper axe form between courses. Best of all, if something goes wrong, let's say you botch an execution or someone gets squeamish mid-torture, it's your head on the proverbial, and possibly literal, chopping block. The same crowd that cheered your last performance will turn on you faster than a spooked chicken. You're not a man, you're a tool, and everyone pretends you don't exist unless they need something violently removed. So yes, the town needs you, but they'd rather you come in through the back door, wear a hood, and leave before sunrise. While other boys are learning how to plough fields, shoe horses, or, if they're especially blessed, read, your education is a bit more specialised. You're not studying scripture or sewing techniques, you're learning how to sever spines in one clean stroke. Welcome to your childhood apprenticeship, where precision isn't optional and failure doesn't just cost lives, it ruins your reputation before you even get one. Your father, or some grizzled older executioner with arms like tree trunks, teaches you the sacred art of not messing up in front of a crowd. Because while everyone may pretend they hate what you do, they absolutely will judge your form, footwork, and follow-through like it's the medieval Olympics. Your curriculum includes chopping techniques, because missing the neck by even an inch turns justice into a comedy show. Anatomy, because you need to know which bones are easiest to crack and which ones will make your axe bounce back in public humiliation. And stage presence, because let's face it, every execution is a public performance. You're the final act, the main event, the reason people leave their farms and bring their kids to town square. Think of it as dinner theatre, but instead of dessert, there's dismemberment. There's no practice dummy, unless you count the occasional pig carcass or extremely unlucky rebel. Most of what you learn is on the job. And let's be honest, everyone remembers your first time, especially if it doesn't go well, especially if you freeze or shake, or, heaven forbid, take more than one swing. Nothing haunts you like a half-beheaded criminal and an impatient crowd. You're trained to be calm, efficient, unshakable, but no one teaches you how to cope. There's no medieval HR department, no stress leave, no how to not think about severed heads, self-care scroll. You just sharpen your blade, swallow your guilt, and get ready for the next performance. And what do you get in return for your finely honed lethal expertise? Not admiration, not gratitude, just silence. Maybe a few extra coins. And the lingering stench of death on your clothes and soul. You're not just trained to kill. You're trained to carry the weight of it, quietly. Picture this. It's a sunny morning. The market square is bustling. Bakers are selling bread that smells vaguely edible. Blacksmiths are banging away with impressive confidence, and the butcher is enthusiastically waving a cleaver. Everyone is shouting prices, gossiping, living their little medieval lives. Then you show up. The crowd parts like you're carrying the plague in one hand and a severed head in the other. And to be fair, sometimes you are. But even when you're just there to buy turnips, people scatter like rats from a torch. You see, executioners were often forbidden, or heavily discouraged, from even entering public markets. In some towns, you had to wait until after hours to buy food. In others, you had your own special corner of shame, where vendors left your goods out for you to collect like a cursed medieval DoorDash. Why? Because apparently, the man who handles legal killings is somehow too unclean to touch a radish. If you dared to mingle with the regular folks, it got awkward fast. Merchants would grab your coins with tongs, or worse, refuse them altogether. You could be holding clean silver, and they'd act like you'd handed them a live scorpion dipped in guilt. "Oh, no, not from you, good sir. We're, out of cabbage today." Children are yanked away. Crosses are made. One particularly dramatic fishwife spits every time you walk by. Not at you, just near enough to make her feelings perfectly clear. Touching goods was risky business. If you picked up a loaf of bread, no one else would want it. If you so much as grazed the apples, that entire crate might be dumped in a ditch out of sheer spiritual panic. One brush of your cursed executioner fingers, and it's farm to forbidden. Eventually, most executioners learned to send someone else to do their shopping, if they could. A relative, a bribed servant, anyone with a less unsettling aura. Someone whose hands didn't smell faintly of burning justice. And so you retreat again, back to your lonely dwelling, your private food supply, your increasingly antisocial lifestyle. Because even when you're off the clock, the town still remembers who you are, and they'd really prefer it if you didn't touch the cheese. Congratulations, you've got your own place. Unfortunately, it's not in town. Not even close. Your new address is beyond the northern gate, past the gallows, next to the wild boars. As a medieval executioner, you don't just get the cold shoulder, you get full-on banishment by zoning law. You're not allowed to live inside the city walls with the normal people. Instead, your residence is somewhere between a hermit's hut and a haunted outpost. You're less village member and more unpleasant forest NPC. There's a reason for this, of course. A combination of superstition, religion, and good old-fashioned hypocrisy. The same folks who hire you to swing an axe at 10 a.m. don't want to risk your allegedly cursed energy wafting through the neighbourhood by 6 p.m. Your house is usually located near the execution grounds, because that's convenient. Convenient for who exactly remains unclear. Not for you, certainly. You live in the shadow of your work, literally. Gallows creaking in the wind. Crows eyeing you like you're next. Sometimes corpses still hang in view of your breakfast table. Bon appetit. The place itself? It's yours, technically. A gift from the city, which is medieval for we dumped some lumber in a field and said good luck. Drafty, damp, and wonderfully secluded, your home might be the only one in Christendom with a doormat that says, "Abandon hope, ye who enter here." Not for visitors, but for your own self-esteem. No neighbours, no casual strolls, no visiting merchants or passing monks. Just you, your tools, and the occasional raccoon with no sense of personal space. You might hear the church bells in the distance, but you won't hear the laughter of the marketplace. You're close enough to serve the town, but far enough to never belong to it. And when storms roll in, who rushes to check on you? No one. The town forgets you exist, until the next criminal needs a very final solution. So there you live, outside the walls, a man apart. visible only when your presence is required. Like thunder, ominous, functional, and best appreciated from a distance. So, you're an executioner. You live outside the walls, your handshake is treated like biohazard, and your grocery runs require diplomatic finesse. But surely, you can find comfort in family, right? Right? Well, here's the thing. Medieval executioners did have families. They just had a hard time starting them. See, once your occupation is known, your dating prospects plummet faster than a heretic through a trapdoor. No one wants to marry the guy whose job description includes the phrase, "clean up arterial spray." Respectable families lock their doors when you walk by. Fathers hold their daughters closer. Even the town drunk, who once proposed to a goat, looks at you and says, "Bit much, don't you think?" So your dating pool ends up being shallow. Very shallow. Often, the only people willing to marry executioners are other outcasts, gravediggers, knackers, lepers, or, if you're lucky, widows whose standards have taken serious structural damage. Romantic candlelit dinners? Try conversations whispered in alleys so no one sees her talking to you. And if you do manage to marry and have children, they inherit your profession like a curse sewn into their skin. Sons are trained from youth to swing steel with surgical precision, and daughters? Well, they carry the name, which is usually enough to be socially exiled by age 6. It's not so much a family as it is a legally necessary support staff. Your family can't attend festivals, can't walk through town together, can't pretend to be normal for even a single Sunday. If they do go to church, they sit in the back, or they don't go at all, because even salvation has bouncers. And over time, that isolation takes a toll. You love your children, sure, but you also pass them a future that smells like blood and loneliness. The family tree doesn't grow, it repeats. Same job, same shame. Same invisible wall between you and the rest of humanity. There are no proud portraits, no family crests, just a long line of people who wore hoods not to hide their faces, but because the world never wanted to see them in the first place. So, you've executed your duties, literally, all week. You've lopped off heads, disemboweled a heretic or two, and maybe even cleaned your blade with holy water out of sheer anxiety. Surely it's time to confess your sins, right? Light a candle, say a prayer, start fresh. Well, not quite. In the eyes of the medieval church, you're somewhere between necessary evil and walking contradiction. Yes, you enforce divine justice. Yes, you serve the state and uphold law and order. But also, and this is important, you kill people for a living, which, inconveniently, is a sin. And so, despite doing God's dirty work, you are not exactly welcome in his house. Many executioners were outright denied confession. Some priests wouldn't listen. Others insisted you undergo ritual cleansing before stepping inside the church. Which is tricky, because no amount of soap washes away a reputation. And don't even think about receiving Holy Communion. That was reserved for clean souls. Yours is more of a permanent stain. It's a cruel irony. You kill with state approval, yet spiritually, you're treated like a man who strangles kittens for fun. Even lepers, who at least had a medical excuse, were often treated with more compassion. Weddings? Not in the church. Christenings? Maybe, if the priest is having a generous day and half the town isn't glaring at him. Funerals? Don't count on it. Some executioners weren't even buried in consecrated ground. They got the ditch outside the cemetery walls, prime real estate for exiles, suicides, and people who forgot to tithe. So where does that leave you spiritually? Nowhere comforting. You spend your life surrounded by death, and yet you have no path to forgiveness. You can't unburden yourself. You can't cry to a friar or light a votive for your sins. Instead, you carry them, quietly, heavily. Sometimes you drink, sometimes you scream into the woods, sometimes you just sharpen your blade again. Even when you believe you're doing right, when the law is clear, the trial fair, you still go home unsure whether you're damned by man, by God, or both. Because even in a world where everyone sins, You're the one who made a profession out of it. There's nothing quite like the pressure of performing executions in front of a screaming crowd. It's part justice, part ritual, part public entertainment, and you're the main act. Forget about nerves. Forget about bad weather. The crowd doesn't care if your wrist hurts, if your stomach's empty, or if the axe is a little dull from last week's double hanging. They came to see a show. And you? You're holding the spotlight and the blade. The goal is simple. One clean swing. A fast, clean beheading is the gold standard. Anything less, and the murmurs begin. Miss by an inch? The crowd gasps. Take a second swing? They groan. A third? Now they're booing. Some are laughing. One kid just started crying. Someone throws an onion. And let's be honest, you feel it too. The shame, the failure, the victim still twitching on the block, the blood spurting wrong, your boots sticky with regret. You weren't trained for this part. The psychological shrapnel that comes from turning someone's last moment into a civic embarrassment. Sometimes the axe gets caught in bone. Sometimes the condemned jerks at the last second. Sometimes your hand just slips. And in those moments, your entire reputation, and possibly your job, hangs in the balance. Because here's the thing, no one cares how hard the job is. They just want it to look easy. Executioners are supposed to be clinical, unemotional, precise. If you falter, you risk looking weak. And in a world obsessed with strength, weakness is contagious, and the rumours spread fast. He needed 2 swings. His hand was shaking. The guy suffered. You become a cautionary tale whispered in breadlines. Don't end up like that poor soul, or worse, like the guy who couldn't even finish the job. So you go home, scrub your blade, and relive every mistake, every gasp, every groan. You replay it until your mind is too tired to keep spinning, and even then, it lingers. Because in your world, the axe doesn't just fall on the condemned. It hovers over you too, every time you step onto that platform. So you've done the deed. The crowd has gasped, gawked, and dispersed. The condemned is headless, justice is served, and the village square is back to selling cabbage. Time to pack up and head home, right? Not even close. Being an executioner wasn't just about swinging an axe. That was the dramatic part, the flashy moment. The rest? Far messier, far quieter, and far more grotesquely underappreciated. Because someone has to deal with the body. And surprise? It's you. You might be asked to burn the body, bury it in unconsecrated ground, or stuff it into a shallow grave under the gallows. The medieval equivalent of a garbage chute. No funeral, no ceremony, just the faint hope that the local dogs don't dig it up. And you don't get gloves, or soap, or a break. You are, effectively, the sanitation department of death, the final cleaner of sin, the silent janitor of justice, and no one thanks you. In fact, the same people who cheered the execution now avoid you even harder because you smell like ash and entrails. There are also the side jobs. Torture? That's on you. Branding criminals? You again? Public shaming setups? You're the guy with the hammer and nails. Sometimes they'll even have you flog someone while reading scripture aloud, multitasking your way through a moral meltdown. Oh, and if a noble demands discretion, guess who's cleaning up the noble's mess with 0 witnesses and a very real understanding that if anyone talks, they're next? Executioner by title, yes. But by function? Your medieval society's all-purpose horror technician. When the crowds disappear, the priests go silent, and the court scribes head back to their parchment. You stay behind. You finish the job no one else can stomach. For all the fear, revulsion, and existential dread wrapped around your role, being an executioner does come with one undeniable perk. You get paid. In fact, you're often paid more than your average peasant. Sometimes much more. Executions, torture sessions, dismemberment duties, they all come with a tidy purse of silver. Add in bribes for extra discretion or making it quick, and you might even find yourself with the kind of money that makes bakers envious. But here's the catch. You can't spend it like a normal person. You walk into a tavern with a jingling pouch, and suddenly the room gets real quiet. The barkeep pours your ale, then wipes the counter like your presence is a stain. You tip him double. He still won't look you in the eye. You go to buy a new tunic, and the tailor hands you the finished product with tongs. The coins you give him are real, but to him, they're cursed. Blood money, he mutters, as if the silver will bite him. And heaven forbid you try to give charity. One time you tried donating to the church. They took the donation, then used it to pay someone else to clean the holy relics, just in case. Sure, you can accumulate wealth. You might even build a small home with actual furniture, rare for your class. But the irony? The more you earn, the more isolated you become. You're rich, yes, but rich like a dragon, hoarding gold in a cave, alone and feared. People assume the money makes up for the stigma, that a heavy purse balances a heavy conscience. But gold doesn't silence nightmares. It doesn't scrub blood from your memory, or buy you back your humanity. It just sits there, cold, shiny, useless for the things that matter. You don't buy peace with money in the Middle Ages. You buy silence. You buy space. You buy the right to drink alone at a corner table without being told to leave. And deep down, you know the truth. Every coin you carry was bought with someone else's last breath. That's the currency of your life. And no amount of it ever buys forgiveness. In a town of maybe a few hundred people, everyone knows who you are. They know your name, your house, your footsteps, your job, and, most importantly, your shadow. They whisper it. That's him. They murmur it as you pass. Executioner. They pull their children close, as if you might accidentally decapitate someone mid-walk. And yet, despite this widespread recognition, no one really knows you. You could have a favourite song, a childhood memory, a surprisingly decent hand at wood carving, but that doesn't matter. Your entire identity is reduced to one role, the blade. People don't see you. They see what you do. You're a living job description. Even when you're off duty, just walking to buy onions, people cross the street like you're contagious. No one asks how you're doing. No one asks if the job weighs on you. Because they've already decided you don't feel anything. To them, you're not a man with doubts or regrets. You're the axe with legs. It's a strange duality. You are known by everyone, yet fully understood by no one. You're present in every courtroom sentence, every hushed bedtime story, every moral lesson whispered to misbehaving kids, but never really invited into the world you serve. When you walk into the tavern, voices quiet. When you leave, they rise again. You hear laughter, but never with you. Always after you've gone. There's no, "How was your day?" No, "You holding up all right?" No, "Do you ever wish it was different?" If you speak too much, you're unsettling. If you say nothing, you're cold. If you smile, that's the worst. It's creepy. The man who swings the sword shouldn't be smiling. Ever. And so, over time, you play the part. You become the figure they already believe you are, grim, silent, and carved from stone. You learn to stand still, to nod, to fade. Because while everyone in town knows your name, not a single one of them knows you. You're a myth with a pulse, a necessary ghost. Familiar in function, alien in everything else. After a long day of dismemberment, blood-stained boots, and polite public trauma, you finally return home, to your charming little hut outside the walls, surrounded by silence and a slight smell of iron. You take off your cloak. You lay down your axe. You sit at the edge of your straw mattress and try to be human again. But the nightmares are already waiting. You lie down and close your eyes. And there they are, the faces. Not heroic, not villainous, just people. Some screamed, some cried, some mumbled prayers with trembling lips. Some looked you straight in the eye as if to say, "You know this is wrong." And the worst ones? The ones who said nothing at all. The calm ones. The resigned ones. the ones who accepted their fate faster than you ever could. You relive every swing. You feel every bone crunch. You hear the gasps of the crowd, their disgust, their delight. You see the bodies falling in slow motion, like tragic marionettes with their strings cut. There's no escape. Not in sleep, not in silence, not in drink. Believe me, you've tried. You start to flinch at everyday sounds. The clatter of firewood, the snap of rope, the creak of wooden stairs. All reminders, all echoes. And you never forget the ones you botched, the blade that hesitated, the cut that went crooked, the moan of someone who was supposed to die faster. You carry that. No one checks on you. There's no medieval counsellor for post-traumatic decapitation disorder. You don't write letters. You don't cry in public. You stare into the fire and hope your soul doesn't go fully numb before your hands do. Sometimes, late at night, you ask yourself, what if they were innocent? What if justice got it wrong? What if I got it wrong? But you already know the answer doesn't matter, because the sentence was passed. The crowd gathered, the axe fell, and the nightmares stayed. You were trained to kill, not to grieve. But your dreams didn't get the memo. So you wake up with clenched fists, aching temples, and blood that won't wash away, because it's not on your hands anymore. It's in your head. The thing no one tells you when you become an executioner is this: you don't retire. There's no farewell feast, no pension, no golden axe mounted on a plaque. You just start shaking one day, or missing, or dreaming too loudly, and the town begins to whisper, not with sympathy, with concern, not for you, for efficiency. Because to them, you're not a man. You're a mechanism, a moving part in the justice machine. As long as the blade is sharp and the swing is steady, they nod from a distance and pretend you don't exist. But the moment you falter, the instant your hands tremble on the block, or you take a second too long with the rope, the machine creaks and they all notice. Suddenly you're a problem, a liability, not because your soul is unravelling, but because you're disrupting the spectacle. The crowd didn't come to see guilt. They came to see competence. So the town begins its quiet transition. Maybe a younger man, your apprentice, your son, your distant cousin, starts handling smaller jobs. A flogging here, a branding there, then a hanging. No one tells you you've been replaced. You simply start getting fewer summonses. The coin slows. The stares change from fear to faint pity, the most dangerous kind of pity, because it means they've stopped needing you. And when you're finally forgotten, it's not by accident. It's design. You fade into your cottage outside the walls, your tools rusting beside you. Your hands, once strong and precise, now tremble when you lift a spoon. Your knees ache from a lifetime of kneeling at the block, and no one comes to visit. Your name becomes an uncomfortable footnote in village memory. Remember old what's-his-name? The one with the axe? Oh yeah, didn't he go mad? And when you finally die, probably alone, the church still isn't sure whether to bury you inside the gate or just leave you under a tree somewhere. Because in the end, you were never part of the town. You were a service. And services, when worn out, are quietly discarded. At first the job made sense. The condemned were thieves, murderers, heretics. You were the arm of the law, the edge of justice. You didn't question. You executed, efficiently, publicly, without hesitation. But as the years dragged on, and the block grew slick with repetition, something began to itch beneath the surface of your certainty. It starts small. A man sentenced for stealing a loaf of bread. He had 5 children. No defence. Just hunger. Then a woman, accused of witchcraft because she muttered prayers in the wrong language. You saw the fear in her eyes, the absolute confusion as the noose slipped over her neck. And then the nobles, the ones who ordered deaths not because of guilt, but because of politics, land, jealousy, or the need to make someone disappear. You start to realize you're not just burying criminals, you're burying secrets. The executioner's block becomes a filter, one that sifts out the inconvenient, the poor, the powerless. And you're the final stamp, the one who makes it irreversible. You want to believe in law, in structure, in right and wrong. But the voices that once declared guilt so confidently now ring hollow. You've heard the crowd cheer as a man screamed. You've seen magistrates exchange glances like merchants haggling over a soul. And you were always told, it is not your place to judge, you only carry out the sentence. But what happens when the sentence is wrong? There's no room to ask, no confessional booth, no forum. You sit alone at night, sharpening your blade, wondering how many lives were ended because someone needed a message sent. And you can't say anything, not just because it's dangerous, but because who would listen? You're the executioner. No one believes the man who wears the hood. You don't get opinions, you get orders. So you bury justice, one stroke at a time. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because in this world, truth is a luxury, and you're just the broom that sweeps it under the scaffold. And the worst part? You're starting to think you were never justice's sword, just its grave digger. You spent your life in service, not to glory, not to gold, not even to justice, just to duty, the grim, blood-soaked kind no one talks about at feasts. And when your end finally comes, it isn't dramatic, no poetic final words, no family gathered at your bedside, just a cough that doesn't go away, a slow fade in a straw-stuffed bed that still smells faintly of iron and damp rope. One final breath, and that's it. No bells toll, no priest rushes to your side, no one weeps. Your body is found by a local boy, or maybe not found at all until the smell becomes a problem. The town clerk marks your passing in one sentence, scribbled on the back of a tax ledger. Executioner, deceased, replacement pending. There's no funeral procession, no carved headstone, maybe a wooden marker if someone remembers, but it won't last the winter. You're not buried in the churchyard, of course. You're laid in the earth outside the gates, the same gates you were never allowed to pass through in life. Executioners, after all, were unclean, tainted, useful, disposable. You were the one who buried hundreds, and yet no one truly buries you. The town moves on quickly. There's always another blade, another son, another poor soul who inherits the job like a curse wrapped in tradition. In the years to come, people might speak of you in fragments. The one who beheaded that baron, remember? The one who drank alone and never looked anyone in the eye. Or worse, what was his name again? Your legacy isn't stories or children or peace. It's silence. It's absence. It's the space you filled that no one wants to talk about. And maybe that's fitting. You spent your life ensuring the guilty were forgotten. You just didn't realize you'd be forgotten with them. So, in the end, your death mirrors your life. Necessary, but never mourned. Because in medieval society, you were never meant to be remembered. You were meant to be endured. And now, you're finally not. It all started with water running through a ditch. On January 24th, 1848, a man named James W. Marshall, working on the American River near Coloma, California, looked down and saw something strange glinting in the sun. At first he didn't believe it. It was just a tiny yellow flake. Could have been fool's gold. But no. It passed the scratch test. It was real. Gold. Actual gold. He ran to tell his boss, John Sutter, who was less than thrilled. Sutter wasn't thinking about riches. He was thinking about land. He was building an agricultural empire, and he knew what a gold discovery meant. Chaos. Stampedes of strangers, squatter claims, and the end of his carefully laid dreams. So the two men tried to keep it quiet. Spoiler. They failed miserably. Within weeks, the rumours spread like wildfire, literally faster than the mail system. Locals were showing up with pans and pickaxes, People abandoned jobs mid-shift. Sailors jumped ship in San Francisco and vanished into the hills. Newspapers didn't even bother fact-checking. Gold found in California was printed like gospel. And then all hell broke loose. That summer, President Polk confirmed the discovery in a speech to Congress. That was it. The genie was out of the bottle. By 1849, over 90,000 people, nicknamed 49ers, were pouring into California by land, sea, and every miserable in-between route imaginable. And what started as one man squinting into a ditch became the largest mass migration in US history. But here's the thing. Marshall never got rich. Neither did Sutter. The discoverers ended up broke, bitter, and pushed aside as the gold fever they unleashed consumed everything. So, picture it. One accidental flicker in a muddy trench led to a global stampede, reshaped the map, fueled American expansion, and catapulted California from sleepy frontier to statehood in just 2 years. And the irony? The men who found the gold? They barely got a nugget. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive deeper. Into the madness, the migration, and the myths that turned California into the land of golden dreams and broken promises. Imagine you're a farmer in Ohio or a shopkeeper in Boston in 1849. You hear the whispers, see the headlines, gold, mountains of it, just lying there for the taking in California. You sell your land, kiss your family goodbye, and start walking, literally, across the country. That's what thousands did. And just like that, the age of the 49ers had begun. They came in waves, from every state, and from places much farther. Latin Americans, Australians, Europeans, even a contingent of Chinese miners braving the treacherous Pacific crossing. Some came in covered wagons, enduring cholera, starvation, and every kind of weather hell the West could throw at them. Others boarded creaky ships, took a detour through Panama, and hoped they wouldn't catch yellow fever before boarding another ship north to San Francisco. And oh, San Francisco, a once sleepy port town with maybe 1,000 residents before the rush. By the end of 1849, over 25,000 people had flooded in. It was a surreal transformation. Canvas tents popped up faster than buildings. Whole ships were abandoned and turned into warehouses, prisons and hotels. You could walk through the harbour without touching water, just stepping from one deserted ship deck to another. It wasn't glamorous. Picture mountains of mud, makeshift saloons, overpriced pickaxes, and a real estate market that made Manhattan look like a bargain bin. A single egg might cost you threes. A decent pair of boots? Good luck. Maybe $100. Inflation ran wild, and scams were more common than gold nuggets. But that didn't matter. The dream was enough. Gold fever had its grip. Some struck it rich in a single afternoon. Others dug for years and died penniless. The rivers of the Sierra Nevada became clogged with miners, each swinging a pan, hoping their next scoop would change everything. This migration changed more than just California. It altered the entire American psyche. Suddenly, hard work wasn't just noble, it might make you wealthy. Manifest Destiny got a shot of adrenaline. California, barely a blip on the map a year before, was now the promised land. Of course, when thousands of desperate men pile into the same few valleys with shovels, things get tense. So, you've made it. You've walked across deserts, survived dysentery, and maybe even dodged a few bandits. You've reached gold country. Congratulations. Now the real misery begins. Mining wasn't a glorious treasure hunt. It was back-breaking, soul-crushing labour. Forget chests full of gold coins. This was hours spent knee-deep in freezing rivers, swirling pans of gravel, praying to find a glimmer. Most didn't. For every lucky strike, there were 1,000 empty pans and 10,000 aching backs. In the early days, it was all about placer mining, scooping gravel from riverbeds and letting water do the work. But as the easy gold vanished, things escalated. Miners turned to rockers, sluices, and eventually hydraulic mining, a violent process that blasted entire hillsides apart with water cannons. It tore through the land and poisoned rivers. but it got results. The camps were chaos. Imagine a rowdy collection of tents, makeshift cabins and saloons, all stitched together by desperation and mud. Bathing was optional. Food was scarce. Whiskey was not. Violence simmered under the surface. Arguments over claims turned deadly fast, especially when no one trusted the courts and everyone had a shovel. And then there was the disease. With thousands crammed into unsanitary camps, cholera and dysentery were just part of daily life. If you didn't die from contaminated water, you might die from a poorly cooked squirrel or an infection from a minor cut. There were no real doctors, just a few medicine men with more moonshine than medical knowledge. To top it all off, the prices were absurd. A shovel that cost $2 in New York could run you $30 in the mines. Eggs were luxury items. Laundry? Hope you enjoy wearing dirt. And if you struck it rich, good luck keeping it. Theft was rampant. One moment you had a pouch of gold dust, the next morning it was gone, and so was your bunkmate. But somehow, the myth endured. People kept coming. The hope, the gamble, the raw possibility of it all was enough. Where gold went, people followed. And where people went, chaos wasn't far behind. The gold rush didn't just create mining camps, it birthed entire towns overnight. Places like Placerville, Marysville, and Deadwood, yes, that Deadwood, exploded in population faster than anyone could control. They were called boom towns, and the name fit. They boomed into existence and often collapsed just as fast. These were places without laws, without real government, and often without a moral compass. Judges were rare, sheriffs were rarer. And the gold? It made men desperate. If you didn't stake a good claim, someone might steal it. If you did stake a good claim, someone might still try to steal it, or just shoot you and take it. Enter the vigilantes. In towns where the law hadn't arrived, or had been paid off, citizens often took justice into their own hands. Vigilante groups formed, sometimes with noble intent, other times with pure greed. Trials could be quick, sentences quicker. If someone was caught stealing gold or cheating at cards, they might be hanged from the nearest tree without so much as a trial. It wasn't justice, it was convenience. The saloons were the nerve centres of these towns. Gambling, drinking, brawling, and the occasional accidental gunshot were all part of the soundtrack. And if you were looking for company, the soiled doves, women who'd followed the rush westward, ran the bordellos, charging premiums for their companionship and surviving in a world heavily tilted against them. Still, not everyone was lawless. Many tried to build real communities. Churches sprang up, schools opened, and newspapers began circulating. San Francisco even formed a committee of vigilance to root out corruption, and ended up becoming more powerful than the actual government. One strange detail: gold wasn't always used for buying things. It was too easy to shave off. Instead, people traded in gold dust, literally measured by tiny brass scales on the bar counter. A pinch might get you a meal, a full pouch, a night you might not remember. But boom towns weren't built to last. Once the gold dried up, so did the population. Many towns were abandoned, becoming ghost towns almost overnight. While prospectors chased dreams of wealth, others paid a price that was far higher than gold. The California gold rush wasn't just a story of fortune, it was also one of displacement, violence, and racial injustice. And the first to suffer were the Native American tribes. California's indigenous peoples had lived in the region for thousands of years, but once the rush began, they were driven from their lands with brutal speed. Forests were cut down, rivers poisoned by mercury and sediment, and hunting grounds overtaken by miners and boomtowns. Some tribes were forced into servitude under the guise of apprenticeships. Others were outright massacred. State-sanctioned militia campaigns were even funded to remove native populations. It was nothing short of a disaster. In just 2 decades, California's native population plummeted by nearly 90%. And then came the waves of immigrants, especially the Chinese. By the early 1850s, tens of thousands of Chinese labourers had arrived in California. Most intended to work, earn money, and send it home to their families. But what they got instead was suspicion, racism, and harsh taxes. In 1850, California passed a foreign miners' tax, targeting the Chinese specifically. They were banned from owning land, from testifying against white men in court, and from mining without paying extortion-level fees. Yet despite these barriers, many Chinese miners endured. They formed tight-knit communities, reworked abandoned claims, and even built the backbone of future infrastructure, laying tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad just a few years later. Mexican and Latin American miners were also pushed out, often violently. Despite having legitimate claims and gold mining experience, they were hounded out of towns, labelled greasers, and stripped of their rights. And African Americans? Both free and enslaved individuals came west seeking opportunity. Some did find it, establishing businesses, farms, and even newspapers. But the racial lines were always shifting, and the promise of freedom came with no guarantees. Slavery wasn't legal in California, but loopholes were exploited by southern slaveholders who brought enslaved people with them under other names. The gold rush transformed America, but it also revealed its deepest contradictions. It was a land of opportunity, yes, but only for some. Gold didn't just glitter, it greased the gears of a transforming nation. The California gold rush injected a seismic jolt into the US economy. By 1852, gold exports from California totaled over $80 million. That's billions in today's dollars. That kind of influx doesn't just fill pockets, it fills banks, backs currencies, and fuels industries. Suddenly, California wasn't a sleepy western frontier. It was the epicenter of national attention, wealth, and ambition. But there was one big problem. California wasn't a state. It wasn't even organized territory in the traditional sense. It had been acquired in 1848 after the Mexican-American War, but governance was a mess. The sudden flood of settlers made it clear something had to be done, and fast. So in 1850, just 2 years after the first gold nugget was found, California became the 31st state. That's warp speed for US expansion, and unlike many other Western territories, it bypassed the awkward adolescent years as a territory. Straight to statehood, no waiting in line. But there was a catch. California was admitted as a free state, banning slavery. This sent the already fragile balance between free and slave states into a tailspin. The South was furious, the North was energized, and the political tension pushed the nation one step closer to civil war. Meanwhile, back in California, the wealth kept flowing, and not just from gold. Entrepreneurs realized that the miners were the real gold mine. A German immigrant named Levi Strauss began selling tough canvas pants that miners couldn't tear through, and invented blue jeans. Leland Stanford sold supplies to miners before going on to help build the Transcontinental Railroad and found Stanford University. That railroad, by the way, became the artery connecting California's gold to eastern markets. Before the railroads, it took months to reach California by land or sea. With trains, a matter of days. The gold rush didn't just spark economic growth. It sparked infrastructure, commerce, and a boom in Western migration. And while California grew richer and more connected, the US realized something else. Whoever controlled the West might just control the future. If the gold rush turned men into legends, it also turned landscapes into battlegrounds. The earliest mining efforts were relatively low impact, pans, shovels, maybe a rocker box along a riverbank. But as the surface gold ran out, miners turned to more aggressive methods. That's when things got ugly. By the mid-1850s, hydraulic mining arrived. Picture this. Massive nozzles called monitors shot water with enough pressure to blast entire hillsides apart. Entire mountains were turned to mud slurry in the hunt for tiny flakes of gold. It was fast, efficient, and utterly devastating. Trees were flattened, Hills disappeared. Rivers ran brown for miles. Sediment from hydraulic mining clogged riverbeds and flooded farmlands. The once fertile Central Valley began drowning under tons of mining debris. The Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers overflowed, not just from rainfall, but from the unnatural buildup of displaced earth. Crops died. Towns flooded. Fish populations collapsed. It wasn't mining. It was slow-motion environmental warfare. Miners also used mercury to help separate gold from sediment. It worked, but the mercury didn't disappear. It seeped into soil, flowed downstream, and poisoned ecosystems. To this day, mercury from the gold rush era is still found in California's waterways, nearly 2 centuries later. Eventually, the destruction became impossible to ignore. In the 1880s, a group of Central Valley farmers sued a hydraulic mining company in a case that became a national landmark. Woodruff vs. North Bloomfield Gravel Mining Company. The farmers won, and in 1884, hydraulic mining was effectively banned, the first major environmental ruling in US history. But the damage had been done. The California landscape had been reshaped, sometimes beyond recognition. Forests turned to barren mudflats. Hills hollowed out and never recovered. Rivers were rerouted. Ecosystems upended. And yet, the gold rush also sparked the beginning of America's environmental conscience. As people saw the toll, voices began to rise, calling for balance, for responsibility, for protection of the land. These were the seeds that, decades later, would grow into national parks and conservation movements. The gold rush built dreams, yes, but it also left scars. By the late 1850s, the richest gold veins had been tapped. Boomtowns began to empty, and the pickaxes were traded in for ploughs, pens, and printing presses. But the gold rush wasn't fading, it was transforming. What started as a chaotic scramble became a cultural myth. The California gold rush etched itself into the American imagination as a story of adventure, freedom, and reinvention. Newspapers spun tales of lucky strikes and overnight millionaires, while dime novels turned grubby prospectors into rugged heroes of the West. Of course, reality was messier, but myths rarely need facts. The prospector became an American icon. Weathered hat, long beard, gold pan in hand. Never mind that most real miners were broke, or buried in shallow graves. The image stuck. California became synonymous with opportunity. The American dream suddenly had a location. Even phrases we still use today were born in this gold-soaked era. Striking it rich, panning for gold, and yes, even the mother lode. They all echo the lingo of 1850s mining camps. And let's not forget the iconic Levi's jeans, born from the rugged needs of miners and eventually adopted by the world. Cities like San Francisco leaned into the legend. What had once been a lawless port now rebranded itself as a gateway to success. Tourism pamphlets spoke of gold country, and old mining towns began staging festivals, reenactments, and parades, celebrating a time that had nearly broken them. The gold rush also deeply influenced American cinema. Westerns romanticized the lone miner with a heart of gold, fending off claim jumpers and wooing saloon girls. It wasn't accurate, but it sold tickets and helped cement the frontier myth in popular culture. But beneath the glamorized legends lay harder truths of environmental damage, racial exclusion, and lives lost in pursuit of fleeting glitter. Still, the dream endured. And perhaps that was the point. Because the gold rush wasn't just about wealth, it was about hope. The belief that if you were brave or lucky or stubborn enough, you could change your life with a shovel and some grit. The California gold rush officially ended in 1855, but its impact never really stopped. California, once a remote Mexican frontier, had become a powerhouse. Within just a few years, it had gained statehood, reshaped America's economy, and attracted people from every continent. But more than that, it had become a symbol of reinvention, of ambition, of what might still be buried just beneath the surface. The population surge didn't just bring gold hunters, it brought builders, teachers, merchants, and dreamers. Former miners started farms, businesses, newspapers. The infrastructure built for gold was repurposed for growth. Roads turned into trade routes, camps into cities, and shacks into homes. San Francisco went from a mud-soaked outpost to a thriving metropolis practically overnight. And the gold rush didn't just leave physical scars, it left an emotional blueprint. That same gamble-it-all attitude would later fuel the rise of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and the counterculture movements. Whether it was celluloid, silicon, or psychedelics, the idea was the same. Come west, try something wild, and maybe, just maybe, you'll strike gold. Even the tech boom of the late 20th and early 21st centuries echoes the spirit of 49. Young entrepreneurs, fueled by belief and caffeine, rushing into California with nothing but a laptop and a dream. It's not so different from those dusty miners with pickaxes and high hopes. But the gold rush also reminds us of what ambition can cost. Native communities decimated, ecosystems disrupted, inequality baked into the economy from the very start. For every lucky strike, there were hundreds left behind, forgotten in the footnotes. Today, remnants of that era still dot the landscape: ghost towns, rusted mining equipment, and winding trails through the Sierra Nevada. Museums preserve the artifacts, schools teach the legends, and tourism boards sell the fantasy. But the deeper legacy lies in the psyche. The gold rush gave America a permanent sense of urgency. The idea that something bigger, better, richer is always out there. All you have to do is chase it. So when you hear the phrase, California Dream, remember, it started with a shimmer in the dirt, and 1,000 men willing to risk everything for a shot at something more. Long before anyone carved laws into stone or inked treaties onto papyrus, trade was already shaping the ancient world. It began not with maps or merchants, but with footsteps, worn tracks across hills and valleys, trodden by prehistoric peoples in search of what they lacked. Long before the Silk Road, the Amber Road, or the Spice Route, there were trails of salt, stone, and survival. Imagine a time before writing, before cities, when humans lived in scattered tribal groups, bartering goods out of necessity. One village had flint, another had shells, a third had access to salt, a precious preservative in a world without refrigeration. Somehow, those items moved, traded hand to hand, tribe to tribe, across vast and difficult terrain. And the evidence is clear. Obsidian from Anatolia shows up in Neolithic dig sites hundreds of miles away. Baltic amber turns up in graves as far south as Mycenaean Greece. Someone, long before borders and bureaucracy, was moving these goods. These first trade routes were not carved or engineered. They were organic, dictated by nature. Rivers became highways. Mountain passes became corridors. Forest trails became lifelines. And with each passing generation, these paths grew more defined. Hunters became traders, and traders became messengers, carrying not only goods, but also gossip, stories, and even early religious ideas. Trade wasn't just about objects. It was about knowledge. It was how farming techniques, metallurgical skills, and even early artistic styles spread between cultures. A tribe that learned how to smelt copper from another might change its entire way of life. A decorative motif shared through traded pottery might inspire a whole new artistic tradition. These exchanges were slow, often spanning generations, but they were revolutionary. And all of this happened before writing existed. The legacy of these early routes lies in their persistence. Many later trade roads, like parts of the Silk Road or the Arabian incense trails, followed the same general paths first used by prehistoric traders. These invisible highways were the nervous system of early human connection, a web of trails that wove the world together long before anyone ever drew a map. By 3000 BCE, the scattered barter trails of prehistory had evolved into something more sophisticated, structured commerce between cities, kingdoms, and eventually empires. Nowhere was this transformation more dramatic than in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Often called the cradle of civilization, it was also the cradle of ancient commerce. The Sumerians, and later the Akkadians and Babylonians, weren't just farmers and builders. They were traders, and they knew the value of keeping records. Around this time, they developed cuneiform, one of the earliest known writing systems. At first it was used to track goods: how much grain was traded, how many goats exchanged, what quantity of beer was delivered to the temple storehouse. In other words, writing was born out of the need to manage trade. These Mesopotamian cities didn't have everything they needed, so trade became essential. They imported timber from the Levant, copper from Oman, tin from Iran, and precious stones like lapis lazuli from what is now Afghanistan. In return, they exported textiles, grain, oil, and intricately crafted goods. The merchants who facilitated this trade weren't adventurers. They were professionals, often backed by temples or royal houses, with contracts, ledgers, and risk-sharing agreements. Mesopotamia's trade routes extended overland and along waterways. The Euphrates and Tigris served as the main arteries, with barges ferrying goods between cities like Uruk, and Babylon. Overland, caravans of donkeys carried goods north to Anatolia, or east toward Elam. Trade wasn't just economic, it was political. Alliances were forged through exchange. Kings sent gifts to secure peace, and merchants acted as informal diplomats, carrying messages between distant lands. The concept of a merchant class began to emerge. These weren't nobles, priests, or warriors. They were specialists in negotiation, risk, and logistics. And they wielded real influence. In time, their presence became essential to the stability of these early urban economies. Mesopotamia showed that trade could bind cities together, create wealth, and drive innovation. It transformed exchange from necessity to system, from handshakes to contracts. While Mesopotamian merchants ruled the rivers and overland routes of the Near East, another civilization rose to dominate the seas, the Phoenicians. By 1200 BCE, these master sailors from the Levantine coast, modern-day Lebanon and parts of Syria and Israel, had transformed the Mediterranean into one of history's most active maritime trade networks. The Phoenicians didn't build empires through conquest. They built them through commerce. Their city-states, notably Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, were small but fiercely independent, and they shared a common gift: the sea. With narrow strips of land and limited agriculture, these cities turned to the waves for survival. And they did more than survive. They thrived. Phoenician ships were fast, durable, and ahead of their time. They pioneered the use of biremes, ships with 2 rows of oars, making long-distance sea travel more efficient and reliable. These vessels crisscrossed the Mediterranean, trading everything from timber and glass to the famed Tyrian purple dye, extracted from sea snails and worth its weight in gold. But perhaps their most lasting legacy was what they carried along with their cargo: the alphabet. The Phoenician writing system, with its 22 consonantal letters, would go on to inspire Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew scripts, the backbone of modern written communication. They established trading posts from Cyprus to Carthage, from Sicily to southern Spain. Carthage itself, which later became Rome's fiercest rival, started as a humble Phoenician outpost. These coastal colonies created a commercial network that rivaled any terrestrial empire. And Phoenician trade wasn't just about moving goods, it was about cultural diffusion. Through their interactions, they spread technologies, religious practices, and art styles across 3 continents. Egyptian scarabs ended up in Iberian graves. Babylonian cylinder seals were found in Greek islands. A web of connection grew, tied not by blood or blade, but by trade. Yet, for all their influence, the Phoenicians left behind few monumental ruins. Their legacy is quieter, found in shipwrecks, scattered pottery, and the alphabets we still use today. As seafarers like the Phoenicians turned the Mediterranean into a commercial superhighway, another equally vital network was thriving far from the coast, across the vast deserts of North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. These were the trade routes of camel caravans, ancient highways etched into sand, where survival was earned mile by mile. The desert may seem like a barrier, but for ancient traders it was a corridor. Long before paved roads, camel caravans connected sub-Saharan Africa with North Africa, the Levant, and Arabia. These routes moved gold, salt, frankincense, myrrh, ivory, slaves, and stories. The camel, known as the ship of the desert, made it all possible. Domesticated around 1000 BCE, the dromedary camel could endure scorching heat, travel days without water, and carry loads of up to 600 pounds. In North Africa, the trans-Saharan trade routes flourished between kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and later Songhai. These were not barren wastelands. They were networks of oases, market towns, and fortified caravanserais where traders rested, watered their camels, and exchanged goods under starlit skies. Gold from the Niger River basin travelled north, often traded weight for weight with salt, a vital resource in the tropics. Salt from the Sahara was cut into massive blocks and transported south, forming the backbone of empires. Meanwhile, in Arabia, the incense trade was booming. Frankincense and myrrh, harvested in southern Arabia, modern Yemen and Oman, were highly prized in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome for their use in temples, medicine, and burials. Caravans traversed the Arabian desert along routes like the Incense Road, stopping at cities such as Petra and Mecca long before Islam's rise. These weren't quick trips. Some caravans took months, even years. Traders faced sandstorms, bandits, and extreme dehydration, but the rewards were enormous. Cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Uba grew rich and influential, serving as hubs of wealth, culture, and learning. What the desert trade lacked in monuments, it made up for in resilience. These routes connected continents, empires, and faiths. They stitched together Africa, Arabia, and beyond, one hoofprint at a time. No ancient trade network captured the imagination or reshaped the world, quite like the Silk Road. Spanning over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, it wasn't a single road, but a tangled web of caravan trails, mountain passes, and river crossings that wove together the destinies of entire civilizations. It began in earnest during the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, when the Chinese Emperor Wudi sent envoy Zhang Qian westward in search of allies. What he found instead was opportunity, the discovery that distant peoples were eager for China's most luxurious export: silk. Lightweight, durable, and practically glowing, silk became a sensation across Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Rome, where senators paid fortunes to wear it, and then nervously declared it decadent and dangerous. But silk was just the beginning. East met West in the form of goods, ideas, and even diseases. From China came porcelain, tea, and paper. From India, spices, gemstones, and Buddhism. Persia offered carpets, glassware, and horses. Rome and later Byzantium exported wine, olive oil, and fine metalwork. Every link in the chain brought something new and received something unexpected. The road itself was brutal. Traders crossed scorching deserts like the Taklamakan and climbed icy peaks in the Pamirs. Bandits lurked at every pass, and merchants rarely made the full journey. Instead, goods changed hands dozens of times, passed along like whispers through markets and caravanserais. Cultural exchange flourished alongside commerce. Monks, missionaries, and musicians travelled these paths, spreading philosophies and fables. The Silk Road didn't just carry merchandise, it transported mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and art. The spread of Buddhism from India into China and beyond is one of the Silk Road's most profound legacies. Cities like Samarkand, Kashgar, and Dunhuang became cosmopolitan centres, where languages mixed and temples stood side by side. Entire empires rose and fell around, controlling key stretches of the route, from the Parthians to the Sogdians to the Mongols. And then came the Black Death, likely carried along these same routes in the 14th century, reminding the world that trade also moves what we can't see. While the Silk Road carried caravans across mountains and deserts, the Indian Ocean offered a liquid superhighway, one that was faster, cheaper, and in many ways even more influential. By 1000 BCE, the Indian Ocean trade network was already humming with activity, connecting East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and eventually China in a vast web of commerce and culture. Unlike the chaotic unpredictability of land routes, the Indian Ocean had a rhythm: the monsoons. These seasonal winds were predictable, one direction in summer, the opposite in winter. Skilled sailors learned to ride these wind cycles, allowing for planned round trips across vast distances. Thanks to the monsoon system, a merchant ship could sail from East Africa to India, load up with goods, and return months later with time to spare. What did they carry? Everything. From India, black pepper, cotton textiles, ivory carvings, and later sugar and indigo. From Arabia, frankincense, myrrh, horses, and dates. East Africa offered gold, slaves, and exotic animal products. Southeast Asia traded in spices, nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon that were so valuable they could be worth more than gold per ounce. This wasn't just about raw materials, it was about ideas. Islam spread rapidly along these maritime routes, not by conquest, but by commerce. Muslim merchants established communities in Indian ports, on the Swahili coast, and as far east as Indonesia. Local rulers often converted for economic advantage, embedding religion into trade. Ports like Calicut, Zanzibar, and Malacca became multi-ethnic melting pots. You could hear Arabic, Tamil, Swahili, and Chinese spoken in a single market. These weren't backwaters. They were global hubs, centuries before globalization became a buzzword. Ship technology also advanced rapidly. The dhow, with its triangular sail, became the vessel of choice, agile and fast. Chinese junks, massive ships with multiple decks and watertight compartments, later joined the mix, especially under the voyages of Admiral Zheng He in the 15th century. What made the Indian Ocean trade special wasn't just its scale, but its collaboration. Unlike the territorial empires on land, the sea trade relied more on mutual benefit than brute force, at least until later European intervention. As trade routes matured, powerful empires began to realize something crucial. Controlling the road meant controlling the wealth. From the Persian Royal Road to Rome's stone highways to the mountainous trails of the Inca Empire, these overland routes became tools not just of commerce, but of dominance, diplomacy, and statecraft. Let's start with the Achaemenid Persians. By the 5th century BCE, their royal road stretched over 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardis. It was the logistical backbone of their empire, allowing messengers, soldiers, and merchants to move rapidly across 3 continents. Stations were placed every few miles with fresh horses and guards. A royal courier could cover the entire road in just over a week, unheard of for the time. And along with messages, merchants flowed too, paying tolls that filled imperial coffers. Next came Rome, whose obsession with roads was legendary. All roads lead to Rome wasn't just a saying, it was policy. Roman roads were feats of engineering, laid with stone, cambered for drainage, and marked by milestones. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, connected Rome to southern Italy and became the prototype for a network that eventually spanned over 250,000 miles. These roads allowed for fast troop deployment, tax collection, and yes, trade. Goods from the provinces flowed into the heart of the empire: Egyptian grain, Spanish silver, Syrian glass, and African ivory. Far across the ocean, another road empire flourished: the Incas. Without wheels or horses, they built one of the most astonishing road systems in the world. The Chapak Ñan, or Inca Road, spanned over 24,000 miles through the Andes. It linked the empire's mountainous spine from Colombia to Chile. Runners called chasquis relayed messages and small goods across suspension bridges and steep cliffs. The Incas used llamas for transport and imposed strict control over who could use the road, ensuring state dominance over trade. In all these empires, roads weren't just about movement, they were about control. They allowed rulers to project power, enforce taxation, and regulate commerce. Traders used them, but always at the pleasure of the state. By the fall of Rome and the rise of medieval kingdoms, many ancient trade routes had decayed or been abandoned. Yet the desire for connection and profit never disappeared. In fact, the medieval period saw old routes revived and new ones forged by a surprising cast of characters: religious pilgrims, crusaders, merchant guilds, and ambitious city-states. Religion was a powerful motivator. Pilgrimage routes across Europe, like the Camino de Santiago, became arteries of movement. Pilgrims weren't just carrying faith, they carried money, supplies, stories, and even new ideas. Inns, markets, and towns grew along these sacred paths, and local economies boomed. Spiritual devotion kept people moving, and commerce followed. Meanwhile, Islamic empires to the east were thriving. The Abbasid Caliphate transformed cities like Baghdad and Damascus into glittering trade centers. Muslim merchants expanded trade into sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, and even China, linking the Islamic world to the revived Silk Road. Arabic became the lingua franca of trade across 3 continents. In northern Europe, the Hanseatic League emerged, a powerful alliance of merchant cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bruges. They controlled the flow of goods across the Baltic and North Seas, trading salt, furs, grain, and timber. With their own navy and legal systems, they weren't just traders, they were an economic superpower. Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa took trade to the next level. Positioned perfectly between East and West, they became middlemen for luxury goods arriving from Asia via the eastern Mediterranean. Spices, silks, and precious stones flowed through their ports, enriching powerful merchant families like the Medicis. Then came the Crusades. While they failed to reclaim the Holy Land, they succeeded in reopening and expanding east-west connections. European crusaders returned not just with scars, but with silks, spices, and new appetites. The result? A booming demand for Eastern goods, and renewed interest in the overland and maritime trade routes that could deliver them. Guilds emerged to protect local economies and standardize trade. Markets became fairs, fairs became towns, towns became cities. Trade wasn't just reviving, it was institutionalizing. By the late 15th century, the world was on the verge of a dramatic transformation. The age of ancient trade routes was giving way to a new era, one driven by sails, cannons, and global ambition. But the foundation for this seismic shift had been laid over millennia, on the backs of camels, ox carts, and merchant ships guided by the stars. The explosion of maritime exploration, led by Portugal and Spain, was not the beginning of global trade, but its acceleration. Vasco da Gama's sea route to India in 1498 bypassed the land-based Silk Road entirely, undercutting Middle Eastern middlemen and redrawing the economic map. Suddenly, spices, silks, and porcelain flowed straight from Asia to Europe, faster, cheaper, and on a scale never before seen. Colonial empires soon followed. The Portuguese set up trading posts from Mozambique to Malacca. The Spanish sailed west and discovered the Americas, where gold and silver were extracted in vast quantities and shipped across oceans. The Dutch and English weren't far behind, founding East India companies that acted like governments, with armies, navies, and monopolies on entire trade networks. Ancient land routes like the Silk Road faded in importance, but their legacy endured in infrastructure, language, culture, and commerce. Trade hubs like Samarkand and Constantinople, though diminished, retained echoes of their former glory. New cities rose from their legacy: Amsterdam, London, and New York. built on the same principles of connectivity and commerce. Modern trade routes, railroads, highways, air corridors, and undersea cables still trace the patterns established by ancient traders. Globalization may be powered by algorithms and cargo ships today, but its DNA comes from Phoenician sea lanes, Roman roads, and Indian Ocean monsoons. And the influence isn't just economic. Ideas, religions, technologies, even diseases, all followed the trails of traders. The compass, the printing press, algebra, coffee, Buddhism, none of these spread without commerce. Trade didn't just move goods, it moved history. So next time you see a container ship glide across the ocean or a freight train rattle past, remember, it's not just steel and cargo. It's the echo of a Silk Road caravan, the shadow of a Phoenician galley, the pulse of humanity forever in motion, chasing not just profit, but connection. Tulum is not your typical ancient Maya city. While most Maya centers are buried deep in the jungle, surrounded by dense forest and hidden temples, Tulum rises dramatically above the Caribbean Sea, perched on a limestone cliff overlooking turquoise waves. It's a postcard scene with a powerful history, a sacred coastal outpost that stood watch over both the land and the sea. Located on the eastern edge of the Yucatan Peninsula, in what is now Quintana Roo, Mexico, Tulum was one of the last major cities built and inhabited by the Maya. Its peak came relatively late, between the 13th and 15th centuries CE, during the post-classic period, just before the Spanish arrival. But despite its late bloom, Tulum left an outsized mark on Maya history. Its name means wall in Yucatec Maya, a reference to the thick limestone barrier that encloses the city on three sides. The fourth side? That's the open Caribbean Sea, stretching endlessly eastward. This combination made Tulum uniquely defensible and symbolically significant. According to some accounts, the city may have originally been called Zamar, meaning City of the Dawn, likely in reference to its perfect alignment with the rising sun. From its cliffs, Maya lookouts could spot merchant canoes gliding in from Cuba, Belize, and even Honduras. Tulum was a key node in a complex maritime trade network, dealing in obsidian, jade, salt, honey, textiles, and dried fish. It connected inland cities like Coba and Chichen Itza to the sea, and its wealth flowed through both canoes and caravans. But Tulum wasn't just a trade hub. It was a spiritual stronghold. Every building, every platform, and every shrine was carefully positioned, many aligned with celestial bodies or sacred dates in the Maya calendar. It was a city that watched the sky as much as the surf. And even after the Spanish arrived and the city was eventually abandoned, Tulum was never truly forgotten. Its ruins remained visible from the sea, a haunting reminder to passing sailors of a civilization that charted the stars long before Europeans arrived. Tulum may appear small compared to Maya giants like Chichen Itza or Tikal, but its compactness is deceptive. Every structure within its stone walls was placed with purpose, guided by astronomy, spiritual belief, and strategic design. This wasn't just a city, it was a cosmic map carved into stone. At its core, Tulum's layout reflects a balance between the earthly and the celestial. The city is surrounded on three sides by thick defensive walls, each up to 5 meters thick and 3 meters high. A clear statement that Tulum was as concerned with protection as it was with worship. But within those walls lies a careful arrangement of temples, altars, and platforms that aligned with the heavens. The centerpiece of the city is El Castillo, not a castle in the European sense, but a temple pyramid that dominates the skyline. Built on a cliff edge, it served both as a religious shrine and a lighthouse for Maya sailors. When the sun rises directly behind it during key times of the year, it lights the facade in perfect symmetry. Some scholars believe it was used to track the solstices and equinoxes, allowing the Maya to align their rituals with the rhythms of the cosmos. Next to El Castillo is the Temple of the Descending God, named for the carved figure above its doorway, a figure with wings and an inverted posture, believed to represent a celestial or fertility deity. This temple faces west, catching the sunset and perhaps symbolizing the transition from day to night, life to death. Key themes in Maya spirituality: Many buildings are constructed on raised platforms and are oriented along precise axes, often northeast-southwest or east-west. These were not arbitrary choices. They echo the Maya obsession with tracking Venus, the Sun, and the lunar cycle. Even doorways and windows seem to frame celestial events at certain times of the year. Tulum's planners didn't just design a defensible city, they designed a spiritual calendar in stone. It was a place where architecture, astronomy, and mythology merged into daily life. Rising above the turquoise sea like a silent sentinel, El Castillo is Tulum's most iconic structure. Positioned at the edge of a limestone cliff, it commands not just the coastline, but the heavens, a fusion of engineering, astronomy, and sacred symbolism. Though not as massive as the Great Pyramids of inland Maya cities, El Castillo was never meant to compete in size. It was meant to signal. Built in stages, El Castillo likely served multiple roles: temple, shrine, watchtower, and possibly even lighthouse. During the day, its high elevation and stark stone facade made it visible from far out at sea. For Maya sailors navigating the Caribbean in large dugout canoes, El Castillo marked both a physical and spiritual harbour, a beacon of protection under the watch of the gods. But it wasn't just a daytime guide. At night, fires may have been lit within the temple atop the structure. Paired with small windows and aligned with seaward gaps in the reef, the glow could be used to help mariners safely reach Tulum's shore through narrow breaks in the coral. This would make El Castillo one of the earliest examples of a lighthouse-like structure in the Americas. Religiously, El Castillo was likely dedicated to the diving god, or the descending god, a celestial figure connected to Venus, the planet that played a central role in Maya cosmology. The Maya believed Venus influenced warfare, agriculture, and the calendar. Structures like El Castillo were used to track its appearances in the sky. During specific dates in the solar and Venusian calendars, the sun would rise or set directly in line with the temple, bathing it in radiant light, a moment of cosmic synchronization. The temple itself is modest in size but elevated for maximum visibility. Its stairways and niches suggest rituals were held atop, where priests performed ceremonies visible from the plaza and coastline below. Unlike massive ceremonial complexes inland, El Castillo wasn't about grandeur. It was about function, guiding ships, channeling solar energy, and connecting the sea with the sky. Tucked near the centre of Tulum's ceremonial core is one of its most fascinating and spiritually charged buildings, the Temple of the Frescoes. Unlike the imposing height of El Castillo, this structure draws the eye not through scale, but through detail. It's a multi-level temple complex, rich with symbolism, iconography, and some of the finest surviving Maya murals on the Yucatan coast. The temple served a dual purpose, as a shrine and as an observatory. The upper level likely functioned as a ritual space for priests, while the lower chamber housed painted murals and stone carvings that brought the Maya cosmos to life. Though weather and time have eroded many of the original pigments, enough detail remains to offer a stunning glimpse into Maya spiritual thought. Inside, the frescoes depict a pantheon of gods, deities, and supernatural creatures. Most prominent among them is the descending god, often shown upside down, a rare and intriguing figure in Maya art. This god, associated with Venus, fertility, and possibly bees, appears in multiple places throughout Tulum, reinforcing his importance to the city's identity. The murals also show scenes of creation, underworld journeys, and cosmic battles. Sky bands, earth monsters, and celestial symbols swirl together in a painted narrative that reflected the Maya view of a multi-layered universe. For the Maya, the world was divided into three parts: the heavens above, the earthly realm, and the watery underworld below, all of which appear in these frescoes in striking visual form. On the exterior, the temple is adorned with stucco masks and niches. Some of these likely held offerings or small idols. Columns support the portico, giving the structure an almost Greco-Maya appearance, a rare architectural feature in this region. Astronomically, the Temple of the Frescoes is thought to have been aligned with key solar events. Windows and sightlines may have marked solstices or equinoxes, helping priests maintain the sacred calendar. It was both a house of worship and a timekeeping device, as functional as it was beautiful. Among Tulum's sacred structures, none is more enigmatic than the Temple of the Descending God. Modest in scale but rich in symbolism, this temple is dedicated to one of the most mysterious deities in the Maya pantheon. A figure depicted upside down, wings or headdress flared, descending from the heavens. His image appears throughout Tulum, suggesting a guardian presence, a celestial overseer of the city perched between sea and sky. Located just to the west of El Castillo, the temple stands atop a small platform. It features a single-room sanctuary with a narrow stairway and a prominent niche above the doorway. And there, in the niche, is the defining element. A stucco relief of the descending god, head first, knees bent, arms outstretched, as though mid-flight or mid-fall. No one knows his true name, but scholars have linked him to Kinich Ahau, the sun god, or possibly to a bee deity revered for its role in pollination and honey production, essential elements in Maya agriculture and ritual. The descending posture is rare in Maya art and architecture. Typically, deities are shown upright, enthroned, or in combat. But here, the inverted figure suggests a spiritual inversion, a messenger between worlds, bringing divine influence down into the human realm. Some interpretations connect him to Venus, the morning star, a powerful celestial body in Maya astronomy associated with cycles of war, rebirth, and sacrifice. The temple itself is aligned to capture the light of the setting sun, creating a dramatic visual spectacle during certain times of the year. This alignment may have signaled ritual dates or seasonal transitions. For Tulum's priests, such moments weren't just beautiful, they were divine appointments. Inside, the temple would have held offerings, incense burners, and possibly the ashes or bones of elite individuals. Though small, it was a site of intense spiritual significance, a space to commune with the sky, interpret omens, and perform rites under the watching gaze of the descending god. This figure, with wings spread and body inverted, became a symbol of Tulum itself, a city that stood on the edge of land, between sky and sea, at the turning point of the calendar and the cosmos. While Tulum is celebrated for its temples and astronomical alignments, its physical defences tell a different kind of story, one of protection, strategy, and geopolitical awareness. Unlike most ancient Maya cities, which sprawled openly across the landscape, Tulum was built like a fortress. 3 massive stone walls encircle the inland sides of the city, while the fourth edge ends in a sheer cliff above the Caribbean Sea. It wasn't just sacred, it was secure. The walls are impressive even today, up to 5 meters thick and as high as 5 meters in some places, with narrow passageways that could easily be defended. These weren't symbolic boundaries. They were practical military installations, built to repel raiders, pirates, or rival city-states. The entrances were small and few, forcing any intruder to enter single file, vulnerable and exposed. Strategically placed along the perimeter were watchtowers, squat, round buildings with small windows or slits that offered clear lines of sight over the land and sea. From here, guards could spot approaching canoes long before they reached shore. These towers may have also doubled as communication points, using smoke or fire signals to alert the city's elite of any threat or arrival. But these defences also had a spiritual dimension. To the Maya, walls didn't just keep enemies out, they separated the sacred from the profane. Inside the walls was holy space, where temples aligned with the cosmos, rituals echoed the stars, and every step was watched by the gods. Outside was the wilderness, the unknown, and the unstable world of politics and warfare. The positioning of Tulum also gave it incredible control over both land and sea routes. It lay along the Maya coastal trade network, a major artery for goods moving up and down the Yucatan Peninsula. Salt, honey, jade, obsidian, and cacao passed through its gates. Any merchant sailing the coast would see Tulum's cliffside silhouette long before they reached it, a reminder of its power and protection. In Tulum, strength and sanctity were never far apart. Long before colonial ports and international harbours, Tulum was a thriving maritime trading post, a coastal checkpoint that linked inland Maya cities with the Caribbean world. Its location wasn't chosen for beauty alone. Strategically perched above the sea with access to sheltered landing beaches, Tulum was built to connect. The Maya were expert seafarers. They carved massive dugout canoes from sabre trees, some large enough to carry 20-30 people and hundreds of pounds of cargo. These vessels paddled up and down the Yucatan coastline, travelling as far as modern-day Honduras to the south and the Gulf Coast to the north. With prevailing currents and consistent trade winds, Maya merchants followed well-established maritime routes that turned Tulum into a key stop. Goods flowed in from every direction. From the inland highlands came obsidian, jade, and cacao, valuable items used in ritual and elite exchange. From coastal regions, merchants brought salt, dried fish, cotton textiles, honey, feathers, and shells. Tulum didn't produce all of these items itself. Instead, it served as a distribution point where goods could be stored, taxed, and redirected along the network. What made Tulum unique was its combination of sea access and defensive structure. Unlike open coastal towns, Tulum had walls. This meant not just protection from raiders, but also control over who came in and out. Goods were monitored, elites collected tribute, and priests likely blessed the transactions, reinforcing the idea that trade and ritual were closely intertwined in Maya society. Foreign merchants may have passed through as well. Some ceramic styles and imported objects suggest contact with other Mesoamerican peoples, including those from central Mexico and the Gulf Coast. Tulum was not isolated. It was plugged into a regional system that pulsed with economic, cultural, and spiritual energy. Canoes likely pulled into small landing beaches just below the cliffs, where goods were offloaded and carried up into the city. From there, they could be exchanged, stored, or carried inland by human porters to major cities like Kobar. Tulum was a crossroads, not just of geography, but of identity. For centuries, Tulum thrived as a sacred stronghold and bustling trade port. But like all great cities, its dominance eventually faded. By the time the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, Tulum was still standing, but already in decline. Its walls remained intact, its temples still visible from the sea, but its golden age was clearly behind it. So what happened? Tulum's decline was likely gradual, not catastrophic. There's no evidence of war or violent destruction, no signs of mass fire or invasion. Instead, it seems the city slowly lost its strategic importance. As trade networks shifted and larger inland centres like Chichen Itza and Mayapan rose and fell, Tulum's influence began to wane. The economic arteries that once flowed through its gates may have rerouted elsewhere. There's also the broader context of Maya civilization. By the late post-classic period, many Maya cities were already experiencing political fragmentation, shifting alliances, and declining populations. Environmental stresses, including droughts and soil exhaustion, likely contributed to the instability across the Yucatan. These factors would have rippled out to Tulum, even if it was more coastal and less dependent on agriculture. Then came the Spanish. In 1518, Spanish explorer Juan de Grijalva sailed past Tulum. His crew noted the city's tall stone buildings and imposing walls. They were struck by its scale and structure. A few years later, during Hernán Cortés' expedition to Honduras, the Spanish again passed by Tulum, remarking on its beauty and the towering temple that stood like a sentinel over the sea. But they did not stop to conquer it. Not right away. By the end of the 16th century, however, Tulum was abandoned. Whether through disease, disruption of trade, or the cultural upheaval brought by colonization and Christianity, its people gradually left. What remained were empty temples, wind-worn walls, and the echo of rituals once performed beneath the stars. Yet Tulum never fully disappeared. Unlike many jungle-wrapped Maya ruins, it stood exposed, visible from the water, a ghost city on the cliff. Sailors passed it for centuries, its silhouette a marker of a world that had slipped into memory. Long after its last incense burned and its final traders departed, Tulum stood silent above the sea, not lost, but waiting. Unlike jungle cities like Palenque or Calakmul, Tulum was never completely buried. Its cliffside perch kept it visible to sailors and locals alike. But it wasn't until the 19th century that it re-entered the world's historical imagination. In 1842, two explorers, John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood, arrived in Tulum during their now famous expedition through the Maya world. Stephens, an American diplomat, and Catherwood, a British artist, were among the first Europeans to document the ruins in detail. Catherwood's illustrations of El Castillo and the Temple of the Descending God mesmerized European readers, and Tulum quickly gained fame as one of the most photogenic and accessible Maya sites. Archaeological work increased in the 20th century. The Mexican government began preservation efforts, stabilizing structures and clearing vegetation. Unlike deeper jungle ruins, Tulum was relatively easy to access and soon became a popular destination, not just for historians, but for tourists, photographers, and spiritual seekers. Today, Tulum is one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico. Thousands walk through its stone gates each day, past temples that once aligned with the stars and walls that once defended sacred ground. Visitors stand where Maya priests once charted Venus in the sky, and where sailors once saw the city emerge like a vision from the waves. Yet the real magic of Tulum lies in what it continues to reveal. New studies are using LiDAR scanning and satellite mapping to uncover more about the site's original layout and its connections to inland cities like Cobar. Scholars are still debating the true identity of the descending god, the precise function of El Castillo, and the exact reasons for the city's fall. But beyond the questions, Tulum remains a symbol of Maya resilience, architectural genius, and cosmic curiosity. It reminds us that ancient people weren't isolated in the past. They navigated oceans, tracked stars, built observatories, and structured cities around cycles larger than themselves. Tulum isn't just ruins on a cliff. It's a living testament to a civilization that saw the universe as something to align with, not conquer. And that vision still echoes every time the rising sun spills across the stone.